Welcome to Got Grass, conversations with the legends and leaders of bluegrass. You've enjoyed live bluegrass at Guitar Town CT concerts in Hampton, Connecticut since 2008. From Tony Rice, Rouse Stanley, and Doyle Lawson to Tim O'Brien, Sierra Hall, and Billy Strings. Now you can go behind the scenes as we chat with your favorite bluegrass stars. I'm your podcast host, Chris Worth. So I want to welcome Jon Weisberger back for the second part of our interview. The first time we talked a lot about bluegrass and country music, the history and the changes. And there were so many questions I had about his other side of his career, which is music, songwriting, and producing. So I'd like to get into that a little bit today, Jon, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right. So let's talk a little about songwriting. I've heard of some of your stories about how you had to write songs for your first band, but do you remember the first song you wrote that was actually recorded by another, like you sold to somebody to record, or?
Yes, actually. Well, so the first song that was recorded by a band that was not the band that I was in, it actually was a real career booster. It was a song called "Losing Again" that a group called the Chapmans recorded back in 2001, I think it was. And I had this song. I had started writing for the next project for the band that I was in, Union Springs, and the band broke up, and so I had this song with nothing to do with it, and I hadn't really thought about doing anything with it. But I went to see. I went to Bean Blossom to see the Chapmans, and also and they had asked about songs, and there was a song that Union Springs, the band that I was in, had recorded called "My Heart's Bouquet," and Chris Davis, who's now with Joe Mullins and Radio Ramblers, at the time he had been in one of the last incarnations of Union Springs, that band, and he had taken that "My Heart's Bouquet" song and was singing it with a group, the Bluegrass something or other, out of Kentucky, and they were performing at Bean Blossom. So I was talking with John Chapman. I said, "Well, you should go listen to Chris Davis and sing this song. Maybe you'd be interested in doing it because the band's broken up, so we're not performing it anymore." So he did go and listen. And said, "Yeah, that's a pretty song. I'd like to record that. Have you got anything else?" And it took me like a week to dig through rehearsal tapes to find a recording of this "Losing Again," but I did, and I sent it to him, and they recorded it, and it was a pretty big bluegrass hit back in those days. Bluegrass Unlimited did a kind of year-end chart roundup, and it was in the top 20 anyhow of bluegrass songs of 2001, and so that was pretty exciting. That made me kind of think that, well, maybe there's something to this songwriting beyond just the very utilitarian view that I'd had of it. And it was notable. So it was successful on its own, which was nice. But then when I went to IBMA that year, several songwriters who I knew were great songwriters approached me and said, "Hey, let's write together sometime." And I had just barely thought about co-writing at that point. I think I'd written one song with the great songwriter who passed away a couple of years ago named Bill Castle. So Bill Castle and I had written a gospel song together, but that was it as far as co-writing goes. But I thought, okay, this is great. And so I started co-writing with people and moved to Nashville shortly thereafter, and things really took off then. But that Chapman's cut was the first one, "Losing Again."
When you look back at that song now, what are your thoughts? Does it still stand up in your mind as a good song, or would you redo it, or what?
Well, I did redo it, and the reason is because the song had a kind of funny structure. It had two verses and a chorus, and then a little bridge and another chorus. So all the verse action kind of came up front before you ever got to the first chorus. Ray Deaton, the bass player with Third Time Out at the time, produced that record for the Chapmans. Ray passed away a few years ago. but he produced that album for the Chapmans, and he rearranged the song to a verse, chorus, bridge, chorus structure, which was more normal, I guess. I'm sure that's what he was thinking, was that, get to the chorus sooner, which is something you hear a lot when people talk about song construction. Um, but I really liked it the way that I wrote it. And so when I did my first solo album in 2008, um, the album called If This Road Could Talk, I re-recorded that song and actually had Chris Davis in to sing harmony on it, which was kind of a neat little historical touch. But so I did go back and record it. So it stands up pretty well. It's a kind of mashy, very sort of 90s style bluegrass song, mid-tempo. Um, but I think that I recorded it with a great band, Ned Lubrecki on banjo and Jeremy Garrett from the Infamous String Dusters, and Andy Falco on guitar, and Jesse Brock on mandolin, and then a wonderful singer up in Ohio that I'd known since I started playing bluegrass up there, named Darren McGuire, sang it. Chris Davis sang harmony, and then Stephen Mogen came in and sang some harmony too. So it was a lot of fun to record.
Nice.
How many songs have you had recorded since then? I'm guessing a couple hundred or more. Or?
It is a couple hundred, it's 240, 250, something like that. The number just keeps on piling up. Which is exciting. I've actually got I've been really blessed to have a high batting average as far as that goes. I've written maybe 900, somewhere 900 and something songs. And so to have that many recorded has really been exciting and very, very rewarding. I was lucky as far as that goes.
Would you characterize songwriting as an art or a craft or combination?
Yeah. Well, it's an art, but making great art often benefits from having a lot of craft at the artist's disposal. If you sort of think art is art at its bottom, art is a way of communicating with people and getting them to understand something or feel something or both. And developing your craft gives you more tools to accomplish that job, and a kind of better sense of how to make that work successfully.
Has your approach to songwriting changed over the years? I would imagine it has, but could you describe in any way how?
Well, I think so. So first of all, almost just about everything I've written has been a co-write. I started out writing by myself, but once I discovered co-writing, I might have mentioned last time, I don't get a lot of ideas for songs. I'm not an inspired songwriter in that sense. So I've always kind of focused more on the craft kind of end of writing and developing. I think I've gotten better. Well, so one way of measuring this maybe is that when I first started writing, it would take I would have to get together with a co-writer 2 or 3 sessions to finish a song. And now it's rare that we can't get started on a song, get it finished in a couple of hours. So I've certainly learned to be more productive in that sense, and kind of faster at figuring things out. I think I've gotten a better understanding of one of the things that I contribute as a co-writer is sort of understanding, having an ability after some initial bit of song is written, a verse or a chorus or maybe even just a few lines, of being able to sort of map out in my mind what the finished song is going to look like structurally. Is it going to, maybe this is a 3-verse song, maybe this is a 2-verse song, maybe this is a song that doesn't have a chorus, so and those are things that need to be resolved in the course of writing a song. And I've gotten definitely faster at that. I've gotten more trusting of my own of my ability to know when a figure of speech is a cliche that should not be used, and when it's a familiar phrase that people understand immediately. They're kind of the same thing. It's a matter of perspective and learning to, what is, um, when do you need to be original? When does it make sense to use familiar phrases and figures of speech and diction? So in that respect, I think I've developed a lot. And lastly, I would say, I have come to understand, bluegrass, like country music in general, tends to be pretty denotative. It doesn't necessarily tell stories, but it uses words to depict specific situations and to um, uh, 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 make a picture, describe an action, a feeling, something like that. And over the years, as I've written more kind of outside of bluegrass, I've come to understand that there are times where words have their own kinds of associations and reverberations, for lack of a better term. So sometimes you can write a song that is really very vague. It's really hard to say what the song is about, yet it evokes specific emotions and strong emotions in listeners. And that's something that I don't think I really understood when I was starting out.
I feel like with a lot of great songs from the past and present, um, sometimes the simplest thought or statement in a song or line resonates the best because it's just right out there, like Hank Williams. Those songs are very simple. They sound very simple. The
Mm-hmm.
emotions are not necessarily simple, but the song is simple, easy to remember, and it just catches you right away. So, as I'm sure there are lots of little tricks that songwriters use to kind of make songs more palatable and more enjoyable. Is one of them to make it easily understood? Is that something that you try to do in every song?
Understood might not be quite the right word, because, like I said, talking about emotion sometimes, or
Yeah.
where understanding it, what you want is not to get somebody to understand something, but you want the listener to feel something. You want them to get some kind of vibe or feeling out of a song. Um, and there, uh, uh, yes, I mean there are definitely, my goal. I don't want the language of a song to snag the listener's ear, for the listener to go, wait, what was that? Um, Typically, I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions to everything, but generally, you want the song to go right in, and you want for them to follow along in whatever meaning, story, experience, emotions that you're seeking in the song, to flow naturally, without the song drawing attention to itself in a negative way, if that makes sense. If you I mean, it's not that you can't ever use a word like GPS in a bluegrass song, but in a lot of songs it's not the right word to, it's jarring, and it draws attention to itself in a way that detracts from the overall effect of the song. So
Yeah. Yeah. I've asked this question of quite a few people, including Tim O'Brien. Like, how does a song come to you? Is it a phrase or a melody or a couple of chords, or is it just you just sit down and just start writing? And like, what is your process? I guess for if there is one, you can
well
quantify it.
so my process is mostly co-writing, and I rely typically on people that I'm writing with to have some kind of song seed. And there's Mark Simos, who's a guy up in your neck of the woods. Actually, he teaches songwriting at Berkeley School of Music, and he and I started writing together 20 something years ago or so. And I really learned a lot from him. And he talks about song seeds. The song seed is the origin of a song, and it could be an idea. I want to write a song about this subject. It could be a line or a phrase or even just a word that sort of provokes some thought, or it could be some kind of melody, some kind of bit of music. And so typically, if I'm going to write with somebody, I kind of say, well, what you got? And it could be any of those things. For instance, Jeremy Garrett from the infamous String Dusters, he and I have written a lot of songs together, 50 or 60 songs, probably, maybe even more. Um, and most of those have started with when he's on the road. Um, he gets musical ideas and he gets out a guitar and just like makes a voice memo on his phone of this kind of melodic harmonic idea that he's got. And when we get together, a lot of times that's how we'll start out, by kind of going through some of those ideas and finding something. Other times people will have a piece of lyric or a title. Tim Stafford, who I've also written with a lot, keeps a title book basically, where just phrases and hooks and whatnot. He just writes them down, and when we get together, he pulls it out. We kind of go through, and if something catches my fancy, I say, "Well, let's write that one," and and then we do. Um, but so typically the next step, one way or another, is to kind of flesh things. If it's a musical thing, we'll like really try to nail down that music, at least the verse or chorus or whatever we think that music might be. Sometimes it's both, but we try to nail the music down. If it's a lyric idea, especially if it's a hook, we might try to write a chorus for the song that embodies that hook, and then you sort of sit back and figure out, okay, well, now what are the missing pieces, what happens next. And a lot of times, in my experience, a there is this sort of synesthesia between the lyric and the music, where if you have a melody and a chord pattern and you just kind of sing it, hum and la 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 it enough, many times a phrase will fall out that matches the rhythm of the feel and the flow of the line that ends the verse or a chorus or whatever that basic unit is. So that's, and then that becomes, a lot of time, maybe that's your title, maybe there's your hook right there. That's a classic place for a hook to be, is at the end of a unit, or the rhythm of a written line will suggest some kind of melody, with a rhythm. And so you kind of work back and forth to make it all happen.
When you write a song or co-write a song and you think you're done with it, are you done with it? Do you tinker around with it? Do you always say, well, could we change this? Or how do you know when it's done? I guess is a question I would have.
Um, I usually have pretty good idea. Usually when I'm writing something, we have a pretty good idea of when a song is done. Some of the people, some every once in a while there will be some line that will kind of gnaw at me, and eventually I will figure out what it is and propose the change to my co-writer. Sometimes some of the people that I write with have a habit of, especially if they're performers, as they tinker around with the song, learning it and working it up to maybe perform, other ideas will occur to them. A different phrase, or maybe the melody or a chord needs to go different. So we'll revisit things. Every once in a while, we'll get most of a song written, but just be hung up on one line. And if you got it all down, but maybe one line or two lines, and you spend 20 minutes or half an hour just kind of spinning your wheels, just staring at it, then maybe the best thing to do is just like put it aside and come back to it later. And if it's a good song, it won't leave you alone. You'll keep thinking about it, and eventually, I mean, I have text messages to a couple of Becky Buller. I remember one. She tends to be the same way. I'll get a message from her. We'll write something, and then I'll get a text from her, a week or a month later, saying, "Hey, how about this instead?" Um, but usually my goal, typically, and I meet it most of the time, is to write a song in a songwriting session. So by the end, it's like, okay, let's sing this through, let's make a little tape of it, and that's done. You know, oh, that's slightly different than knowing when to stop. And this is something that I find a lot. A bluegrass song. If you think about it, a bluegrass song is maybe 12 lines, 16 lines. You have two verses or three verses, typically four lines each, and a chorus that gets repeated a few times with maybe another four lines. So there's not one of the things that I really have learned over the years, kind of getting back to an earlier question, is a bluegrass song. And probably a country song. I mean, these rootsy songs that are meant to be done in 2 or 3 minutes. And bluegrass has a real form. There's a kickoff, singing, picking, singing, picking, singing, done. And so one of the things that means is that a bluegrass song only has room to be about one thing. And so if you come up with a great line that doesn't relate to that one thing, you have to know enough to say, okay, that's a great line, but not for this song. So I'm going to set that line aside. Maybe I'll come back to it another day in another song or whatever. But that is not right for this song, because this song is about this subject, and that's all that it's got room for. So that kind of makes it easier to sort of figure out how when a song is done.
When you write with someone else, or if two people write together, is it common that one person kind of has the germ of the idea and the other person is more like the editor? Is that a normal way to write, or is that just the way you kind of look at it? Or
I don't really. That's been my experience, but I think there are all different kinds. I mean, some people. I have. I know people. There's some people who write. One person writes the lyrics, and other person writes the music. I don't think I've ever actually done that, but I know there are people who have done that and done that very successfully. As I said, I tend to look for people who have ideas, because I don't have many myself. And it's interesting, and that's been true pretty much from the beginning, and it put me in kind of a funny position, because typically in Nashville, in the songwriting business, which that's a profession, that's a career in Nashville, and there are a lot of people who do that for a living, although not as many as there used to be. But typically, what you would find is smart publishing companies would pair up older, more experienced writers with newer and more unformed writers, on the theory that the experienced guy or gal they've already written all their ideas. They've written thousands of songs. They've already written their ideas. So you get somebody that's a good combination, is somebody who's kind of new and enthusiastic, still has lots of ideas and kind of this fresh perspective, and pairing them with somebody that's more experienced, who may not have as many ideas. So that's been my. So I started being the experienced guy, even when I had only written a few songs. But I think there are so many different ways of writing. Chris Jones and I wrote 7 or 8 number one bluegrass songs, and literally never sat down and wrote together. Even when we were in the same room, we were like emailing each other ideas. So, there's all kinds of ways to co-write.
I mean, famously, Elton John and Bernie Taupin lived in California. Elton lived in LA, and I think Elton would like write a music and record it, send it to Bernie, and he'd come up with the lyrics to it. It was like music first. I don't think they ever wrote together. It was always, here's the music, you write the song, which is another crazy way to do it, but it certainly worked for him.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the other hand, you have like John Lennon, and Paul McCartney, who wrote. Sometimes it was basically one of them who wrote a song, and maybe the other tweaked it a little bit, but it was basically one person's song. But they credited all of their songs jointly, and that's been something that's interesting, kind of a little bit more on the business side. Maybe is that. The Nashville way for years, and I think it's only changed fairly recently, but well into this century, was however many people were involved in writing the song, that's how the song was split up. If you had two people writing, it was a 50-50 split. If there were 3 people, it was a third each, and so on. And in particularly in pop music, starting probably 30, maybe even 40 years ago, where you had these whole the songs were written differently, and so the allocation of percentage shares of the song were allocated differently than just by the number of people. Maybe this person wrote the chorus, so they would get 10%, and this person wrote the lyrics for the verses, so they got 30% or whatever. And that's been kind of interesting to see. I think that's starting to change in Nashville now, but it's still pretty much the case in bluegrass land. And that's especially because when you have ongoing relationships, like there's folks that I've written, dozens, scores of songs with together, and every session is different, and everybody's like sometimes. Maybe one guy has the idea and the other guy basically writes the song off that idea. And then the next time it could be the other way around between the two of them. Or maybe there's really a 50-50 kind of thing. It all sort of evens out over time, I think.
Typically, a songwriter or songwriters get a percentage of the sales of the song. Is that how it works? How do you generally get paid
Yeah.
for you get a
Right.
percentage?
So songs generate royalties.
Right.
And royalties, there's basically two kinds of royalties. One are called a mechanical royalty or a statutory royalty, and those are royalties paid on the sale of physical product. If you have a song on a CD, and a copy of that CD is sold, you get, I think it's up to 13 cents or something like that per unit. The same thing with a download. If somebody buys a download of a song, you get that mechanical royalty. It's a fixed amount established by law, and it's paid per copy. And then also you get paid a kind of mechanical royalty on streams. So when a song gets played on Apple Music or Spotify or something like that, that generates a royalty also. And then and that's a mechanical license again for a copy, even though it's a stream. The music publishers succeeded in getting this statutory license written into law. Then there are also performance royalties, which is when a song gets performed and it gets played on the radio, or it gets streamed, or it gets, sometimes if it gets played in a live performance, that also generates a royalty. And then those kind of, they get assigned differently depending on those two broad categories. There's the mechanical royalty for copies of songs, and then there's the performance royalty for the performance, including broadcast of songs.
I was told by someone, I don't remember who, that if you write a number one country hit these days, it's pretty lucrative for the songwriter. Would you say that's true in general, or is that not really a fair thing to say?
I would imagine it's still true, just because the volume of and the payment system. So airplay, a number one song. If you're talking about radio airplay, uh, the system for paying royalties on those for broadcasting is weighted towards the kind of the mainstream. There are a couple hundred stations that report to the charts, and airplay on those gets weighted quite heavily, because you don't know who's listening. One stream is one listener one time, right? And radio, as you know, goes out into the ether, and all you have are these very imprecise tools for measuring who's listening and so forth. But I think that is probably still the case, and it was certainly the case back in the big heyday of at least country music back in the 90s. There were big royalty payments, but they're also fairly short term. And this is one of the things that's been really interesting to me. We can talk about as much or as little as you want to, but it's kind of part of my business now, working at a record label as well as being a songwriter. And that is in the pre-streaming era, most of the revenue that you made from a song you made in the first year or maybe 2 years of it's being recorded. It gets recorded, it gets played on the radio for a few months maybe, and so there's some money coming in, and it's getting sold maybe in stores. Maybe if it's bluegrass, you're talking about sales mostly at the record table, personal appearances. And For most bluegrass acts, after you've been around in 2 years, you kind of play all the places that you're visiting probably twice, your circuit, and so pretty much everybody who wants that album has bought it. And so all of the revenue from a song was kind of really jammed up in the first couple of years, and then you see it fall off. Um, with streaming, it's different. It's you get smaller payouts, but as long as people keep listening, which now on-demand music means you can listen to a song anytime, right? You don't have to have it doesn't have to be played on the radio, and you don't have to own a copy for you to hear it. If you can think of it, you can hear. I mean, obviously there are exceptions, but basically you can hear it. And so if people like a song and keep listening to it, you keep getting paid. And what I found over now, I really started getting a fair number of cuts back about 12, 13 years ago. And and now there are songs that made their whatever they were going to make when they were released on CD and got airplay in 2012 that have continued to pay these smaller amounts now for 12 years, and over time it adds up to as much or even more than I made originally. So I think that's a huge change in the way that money comes in, for both songwriters and artists, and I don't think everybody's really fully grasped that yet.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious about the actual process of getting a song out to an artist to get performed and or recorded. I mean, obviously, and probably or obviously write with artists for them sometimes or often. But for a songwriter who's just writing songs with somebody else and wants to pitch the songs to either an artist or a producer or an out or a label, what does that process entail?
Well, one of the nice things about the world of bluegrass is that artists are very accessible. If you go out to a show, the odds are pretty good that after the show is over, the artist's going to come out to the merch table and be there to sign things and say howdy with folks and whatnot. And so that means that you can pitch songs to people pretty directly as long as you're not rude about it. I always tell people, don't if somebody's busy signing CDs and selling T-shirts, don't that is not the time to go hand them a CD of songs that you want to pitch to them. You wait until they're done, and then you say, "Hey, listen, here's some songs. Here's a CD or a thumb drive or whatever with 4 or 5 songs. And if you hear something you like, there's my phone number. Here's my email, and let me know." Um, so I think that is a decent way to get started. Um, but I think if you have some ability to write, I mean, there's a lot of people recording in bluegrass, and only some of them write, and so people are always on the lookout for songs. Um, and so, I mean, now I've been doing this for 20 something years, and so uh, I know who's who, and I know who looks for outside songs or songs that weren't generated within the band. So, and a lot of people reach out to me. We're getting ready to go in the studio. Can you send some songs over? Um, and then, but also, a lot of those 200 whatever cuts that I've gotten have been from writing with the artist.
Yeah. So when you do that, or when somebody goes to a concert and meets the artist afterwards and say, "Hey, have some songs I've written," do you somebody has made, I guess, a demo of those, right? Has recorded them either with guitar and vocal,
Mhm.
or how is that typically? Just somebody sits down with a guitar and records the song, or do you send it to somebody to do a more professional demo, or how does that process
Um,
work?
Typically, huh, so there's two aspects to this. One is a lot of people are used to hearing hearing a song through the performance, or hearing past the performance to the song itself. Um, so that is not everybody, but there are some artists who need to hear a band demo, but a lot don't. And then the other thing is you sort of have to keep in mind the economics, which is, as I was a good bluegrass song. It gets some airplay maybe on satellite radio and gets a few copies sold. It's going to generate a couple $100. It's a volume business. So
Right.
if you spend $300 making a demo for a song that earns you $200, you have spent $100 instead of made anything. And one of the things that I kind of appreciate in my current position when I came to work here, and signed an exclusive publishing deal with Asheville Music Publishing that some of the folks who own Mountain Home Music own. One of the things that lets me do is to do demo sessions. So I'm able to do full band demos without having to lay out a lot of cash personally.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but I don't think, I mean, a good song, a good guitar vocal demo is usually enough
Yeah.
in my experience.
Yeah. Interesting. So I'm going to segue into producing music, but my
Sure.
segue question might be a loaded question, but you've been on the IBMA board for quite a long time. And how well do you think IBMA is doing at adapting to all these changes in music production and how artists get paid? I mean, you're talking about streaming and how the whole landscape has changed so much in the last 10 years. Do you feel like IBMA is like with the times or trying to catch up, or where are they at?
I I I think
I don't want
I
you to lose
think
your job.
well, I'm not. I retired from my service in 2015,
Okay.
actually. So I continue to be, I go to the World of Bluegrass every year and do some various tasks for them. But basically, I have not been in a leadership position in a long time. Um, I think. Um, I think the organization played catch up in some respects. I think he's done a good job of promoting bluegrass music in general and enhancing the image of bluegrass and providing, especially developing musicians with the tools that they need to be serious about having careers, professional careers in bluegrass music. In terms of in terms of really making the kind of maximum contribution, both in terms of education and in terms of advocacy, uh, I think I think it's still kind of playing catch up in a way. The educational programs surrounding streaming, which is how records mostly make money these days, has improved over the last couple of years. But I think there's still room for more improvement and more concentration. I remember back in the early 2000s when I was uh, on the education committee and then on the board. This is when Sound Exchange had just kind of opened their doors, and Sound Exchange briefly is a royalty that's paid to artists and record labels for digital broadcasting. Terrestrial radio doesn't pay anything to artists and labels. Uh, Digital broadcasting, and that includes satellite radio, does, and satellite radio pays a pretty good royalty, and so stuff was getting aired, but if musicians weren't signed up, they weren't getting paid. The money was just sitting there piling up. And so the IBMA for 3 or 4 years, every year at World of Bluegrass, had presentations on Sound Exchange. You need to sign up. You need to do this. You need to do, and not just kind of a one and done. Hey, this is something that's out there. Go chase it down. But like, just kept banging the drum on the importance of this. And it was important. And I think the same is true with streaming, that it really needs to focus on that. There are other aspects of the business as well that have changed a lot. I think touring, and you, I'm sure, have a lot to contribute as far as this goes. But I think live shows, touring, promoting is has some real issues still. I think, especially in the post-pandemic era, people's habits and the ways that they went to or didn't go to concerts has really changed some, and the structure of the industry has changed as well, and we're kind of grappling with that still. But I think the IBMA a few years ago changed from being a 501c6 organization, which is a trade association, to a 501c3, which is a nonprofit and educational one. And I sort of that made contributions to the IBMA and its activities easier because they became tax deductible. But it also kind of changed the orientation to be maybe a little bit less of a business focused organization, because it's now not representing the business, the trade, the industry, but rather has this nonprofit basis. And I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. It gained
Yeah.
something, but it also lost some focus, maybe.
Yeah. Do you think it's harder to make a living as a young bluegrass band these days than it was, say, 15 or 20 years ago? I mean, there's obviously more opportunity to get your music out there, but there's probably a lot more people trying to do the same thing. So, um,
Boy, I I honestly think that there are some ways in which it's easier, because the both the normative bluegrass industry, the world of festivals and the record labels that produce mostly bluegrass, and radio stations that air bluegrass, there's this whole kind of ecosystem um, that has helped foster and survive, allows the music to survive. Um, it is bigger than it was 30 or 40 years ago. Um, and it is also less isolated, so that there are more music festivals, for instance, that will include some bluegrass artists. And I don't think that was the case. It was bluegrass was more siloed, say back in the '80s or even the '90s, and that's less the case now. I think there are also probably more opportunities to make a piece of a living doing other things than just performing. And I think particularly like teaching, that's something, the technology, the Zoom and modern technology, the internet has made it possible for people to give lessons much more easily than they used to. And that's had a big effect in both directions, both in terms of younger people learning how to play from the internet, but also in musicians being able to generate income from teaching. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but I think I think this is the golden age of bluegrass right now. Honestly, there's so much good music. There are a lot of opportunities. There are bands, and there are bands that people never heard of, that people in IBMA bluegrass world had never heard of, who are out there riding around in tour buses. That whole sort of jam grass scene is a huge is another bluegrass industry that is only partly related to the industry as it has grown going back to the 50s. But there's a lot of money and a lot of opportunity there as well. So it's exciting to see.
is it possible to be a bluegrass success without Nashville? In other words, without being involved in Nashville at all these days, or is Nashville still kind of crucial for lots of interactions and connections and stuff?
Well, you can certainly be successful without being based in Nashville. Our record label out here in Western North Carolina is an example of an institute. And in fact, most Rebel Records is still based up in Virginia. We're here in North Carolina. Pine Castle is also maybe in North Carolina these days, or South Carolina, but it's not in Nashville. Mountain Fever Records is not in Nashville. Um, uh, Rural Rhythm is not well, Rural Rhythm might be now. Anyway, but I mean, there's certainly there are venues and places to play and so on and so forth. So yes, it's certainly possible to do that. Uh, and artists like, we have the Steep Canyon Rangers here, who are a successful bluegrass band who are not Nashville based. Um, and there are plenty of folks like that. A lot of the major artists are not. On the other hand, um, Nashville is a great place to advance a bluegrass career and to make faster progress maybe than you would otherwise, because there are so many people involved in the industry who are there that there's like this real community. If you are an aspiring bluegrass sideman and you want to get hired in bluegrass bands and work like that, if you move to Nashville and you go down to Station Inn on the regular, you're going to meet a huge number of people in the industry, and they're picking. It's just a whole scene. It really is a community, and if you embed yourself in that community, you can get a lot done, maybe faster or easier than if you never go there. So there are a fair number of people that I've seen now, like myself, who I moved there at the end of 2002, and I was there for almost 17 years. And it was great. It was Eddie Stubbs, the great fiddle player and country and bluegrass DJ and MC, told me one time. He said he asked. We played a little private party together with Roland White, and we were walking through the parking lot in the Opryland Hotel, and he asked me how long I'd been in Nashville, and I told him a couple of years, and he asked me if I thought it was a good move, and I said, yeah, I think so. And he said, he looked at me and said, if you want groceries, you got to go to the grocery store. And that is for a bluegrass musician, Nashville is kind of the grocery store. It's not, maybe there's a Minute Mart somewhere else, but it's there's just so much there. There's so many bands, there's so many studios, there's so many songwriters, there just really is this community. So it's still very helpful.
I've found being up in New England, a lot of the young bands study at Berkeley, and then they move to Nashville. I'm thinking
Yeah.
of someone like Bronwyn Keith Hines, who, was up here with Mile 12, and she moved to Nashville, I think. And people like that, obviously, the move to Nashville supercharged her career because she got connected with Molly Tuttle, and we happened to just see them in Connecticut the other night, Molly and her band, and then I was talking to Bronwyn. He says, "Well, I got to fly down to Nashville for the CMAs. I just went there for the rehearsal. I flew back to New York for a performance, and I did see her perform with Sierra Hull and Molly behind Dirk Bentley. It was pretty
Yeah.
cool to see
Yeah.
that."
Yeah.
I think it should have been a longer. They should have really done a whole bluegrass thing without him. I mean, I think the CMAs are ready to hear Molly Tuttle's band without Dirk Bentley in front, but that's just me.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with you on that. Although the CMA award, the CMA and the CMA awards represent a very specific and pretty tiny, at least in terms of number of people, part of the larger country music
Right, right.
industry and scene. But yeah, I mean that's a good example. Del McCurry told me Dell's the big boost to Dell's career was when he moved to Nashville, and he said, for one thing, he said I was there, and and pretty soon all these TV shows and the Opry and all these opportunities where if they needed somebody at the last minute, they knew they could call me up and I could be there in half an hour. And as a bluegrass artist, we didn't need a big load in, we didn't need a complicated setup. We just could walk in with our instruments and do a
Play.
performance. And
Yeah,
so they got a lot of activity that way.
yeah. I want to talk a little bit about being a record producer. Um,
Hmm.
how would you even define that? I mean, I know people talk about what they get involved with, choosing the music, choosing the musicians, kind of sitting there and being like a advisor. But how would you describe a producer's role in getting a record out these days, or for you, for example?
Well, I think the role of the producer, generally speaking, is to help an artist realize their vision for the recordings that they're doing. And that can take a lot of different forms. I mean, it could be just sometimes artist comes in, they know what they want to record, they've already got the songs arranged, they've already got the musicians picked out, or they've got a band or whatever. And your role as the producer is mostly to sit there, and just sort of be an extra set of ears. That was a good take. Or, maybe you guys can do that again, or maybe, try this or try that. But it's definitely a pretty limited role. In other cases, you might be doing a lot. You might be picking the musicians. You might be have a hand in picking the songs. You might bring songs in and go out and scout songs, as well as that sort of in the studio, behind the board aspect, where you're sitting with the engineer listening to the music as it's being recorded, and offering your insights. And then occasionally, like the last full length project I produced was this Bluegrass Sings Paxton collection. There's a bunch of bluegrass artists singing Tom Paxton songs, and it was I had a co-producer on that, Kathy Pink. Kathy mostly focused, actually. The two of us kind of, we put our heads together, came up with a list of artists that we wanted to have on it, and then she worked with them in picking songs out of Tom Paxton's fabulous and very big song catalog. And I lined up to put the band together, worked on getting the singers in, worked on coordinating with some stuff was recorded elsewhere. And so, tracks had to be sent out, tracks had to be collected back, oversee the mixing and all of that stuff. So there was no artist that it was a producer's project, in the sense that the vision was not the artists so much as it was Kathy's and mine for the overall project. And then each artist was kind of bringing their understanding of their particular song to it. So that, yeah, I mean, it varies some, but it's a facilitating role in my view.
I just met Kathy Fink last year because she had approached Guitar Town to perform here, which she and Marcy Markster did with Jake Blunt, and then they had this Chinese dulcimer player.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
it's great stuff.
Unbelievable. Yeah, and she's coming back, I think, this spring too. But
Nice.
Yeah.
So I will say, just to go a little.
Yeah.
I mean, I produce a great band from Western North Carolina, from our area, called Unspoken Tradition. And I produced a couple albums by Trey Wellington, produced an album by Fireside Collective. I'm working with Aaron Burdett, who has a solo career and is now also been for the last couple of years with the Steep Canyon Rangers. We just did a session a couple months ago and had the first single out from that. But I have more or less randomly wound up specializing, at least to some extent, in these sort of multi-artist projects. And it really started with I did an album. It started out to be demos. I was going to do demos, and then I realized, for not much more money, I can get all my friends. I was living in Nashville. I can get all my friends to come in and just like make a record of these songs. And so I did. And there were probably close to 30 people on that album in one role or another. That's when I cut that Losing Again. Chris Jones was on there. Ron Block played banjo and guitar on a couple of things. Megan McCormick, Jenny Lynn Gardner, a long list of people. And then I did my second album in 2014 called "I've Been Mostly Awake," and for that, I had a house band. Which was that same band that I used on some of the stuff in my first album, Ned and Jeremy Garrett and Andy Falco, Jesse Brock, and myself. But all of the songs were original songs that I wrote with other people and then had them come in and sing that song. So there was a song Pam Tillis and I wrote that Pam Tillis came in and sang, and one with Jeremy, and one with Jim Lauderdale, one with Tim O'Brien, and Dale McCurry, and sang some harmony, and Sean Camp, and just a bunch of great songwriters.
Quite a list of
Yeah,
people. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so that was, I mean, that was under my name, but it was really this multi-artist project. And then I co-produced with Todd Gilpin over Mountain Home an album called Roland White and Friends, the tribute to the Kentucky Colonels, and that was in 2018, which I really loved doing. I'd been playing in Roland's band by that point for 13 or 14 years, and the opportunity to sort of get this all-star cast together and do these songs is really good. Billy Strings played a couple of songs on that. Molly Tuttle played a couple of songs on that. John Stickley was, I think of the guitar players because of Clarence White, of course. David Greer, Kimber Ludiker played on that. Kristen Scott Benson. It's a long list. So I've had a fair amount of experience now. And then during the pandemic, we did a series under the title Bluegrass at the Crossroads, where we put together different combinations of musicians who cut 4 songs apiece. We won the IBMA award for Best Instrumental Recording of the Year for that in 2021, I think it was, for recording Ground Speed. So that's been kind of my thing, and it's in every one of these I get to the point where I'm just like ready to tear what's left of my hair out, because the logistics of getting all these folks to do what they need to do and to get it done in a timely manner can be pretty daunting. But it so far it's turned out pretty well, I think.
Well, it makes me feel good that most of the people you've named have actually played here at Guitar Town over the years. So that was kind of my goal, to get almost everyone to come here and play at some point. So
Yeah.
I'm doing it slowly over the years. In your career, have you ever been discouraged to the point where you considered giving up music as a profession? And I mean, I know you had another career besides music, in addition to music, but did you ever consider, like, this music is just not, I'm just not making it, or it's just too much for me? Or have you always been enthusiastically and happily pursuing it with no second thoughts?
Well, so until I started pursuing, I went to school. I actually got a degree in music composition from California Institute of the Arts back in the graduated in the mid 70s, and decided right then and there that I didn't want a career in classical contemporary music, which is what I was doing, because the career path in those days, at least, was mostly you found some place to teach that had a good electronic music studio, and then you kind of composed on the side. It was you were expected to compose as kind of like a publisher parish kind of deal, but it almost always involved teaching, and I just wasn't interested in that. So from the mid 70s until for almost 20 years, music was just a side thing for me. It was something I did on the side, and so when I moved to Nashville at the end of 2002, it was with the intent of pursuing a full-time career in music. And by that point, by the time you're 50 years old, you kind of you know something about yourself, at least hopefully. And so I had thought about it for a while. I felt like I had a good opportunity, and so it was kind of funny. There were occasions where I kind of had the opportunity to get discouraged. For instance, I moved to Nashville, and Chris Jones hired me to be the night drivers. But the first year that I was there, I don't think he was mostly out on the road with the Chieftains, playing guitar with the Chieftains. So Chris Jones and the Night Drivers, the band that I was hired into, existed more in theory than in practice. I think we only did 7 or 8 gigs that year, so I had to find other things to do. So when I started doing more co-writing, because that's a really cheap form of entertainment, get together with somebody and hang out for a couple of hours, and maybe something will come out of it. So no, I never really, I mean, I've been playing music all my life, and this is kind of the one thing that I know how to do. I got some great breaks early on hiring out with Chris. I played, it was kind of funny when I moved to Nashville. I set 3 goals for myself. And one was to play at the Grand Ole Opry. One was to play at the Ryman Auditorium, and one was to be on a major bluegrass record, record on a major bluegrass label that had some national circulation, so forth. And I I got to play at the Ryman within 8 months of moving there. And so I thought, well, I'm off to a good start. And a few years went by, and eventually, Chris Jones went back in the studio and made an album that I played on. That was in 2009. So a few years, but I got that done, and I actually got, as the 10th anniversary of my arrival there approached, I realized I had still not played the Grand Ole Opry, and that it wasn't discouraging, but it was disappointing. And then a few months before I hit my anniversary, Alan Bartram and Del McCurry band was going back to West Virginia, where his wife's family is from, and they got the call to play. Del got the call to play the Opry, and asked me to fill in for Alan. So I just got in under the wire on the Opry performance. So I feel I've been really fortunate and lucky, but also working hard and trying at least to work smart. And that's, one of my passions now is when I work with younger musicians, and they're mostly younger these days, is to really try to underline and reinforce the notion that you need to take your business seriously, and that you need to maximize every opportunity that comes your way, and be thoughtful about it. And that if you do, then, the talent is the least of it in a way. I mean, once you reach a certain level of proficiency, then other factors come into play. How well you get along with people, and I've always gotten along well with people, so that was a big factor. And flexibility and a good sense of business. I think that's probably the things that, as an older person trying to start out a professional career, that was a big advantage to me, because I'd already been paying my bills and raising a family and working jobs for decades. So I knew you have to pay attention to all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good advice to end this conversation on. I mean, an hour flew by. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, because you're a great conversationalist and you know a lot and you express it very clearly. So I want to thank you for coming back and going through this part of your career with us on the podcast. And our next interview is going to be bass player Ronnie Simpkins, who's Ricky's brother, and he's played with Tony Rice and now with the Seldom Seen. So that'll be interesting to check in with him and to see what his thoughts are and all that. But I want to thank you again, Jon Weisberger, for coming on, and good luck with everything. And I will send you the link to this podcast interview as soon as it's ready.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. You had some great questions and thoughtful questions, and it's been a pleasure.
Very good. Hope to meet you in person sometime. Maybe I want to get down to Asheville. I'm not right these days, but at some point, and maybe I'll give you a text and have coffee or beer or something.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Okay. Thanks, Jon.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Bye. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast, and thanks for listening. Visit our website, guitartownct.com, for concert and podcast schedules, or just to send us a message. We'd love to hear from you.